This is the minor side of life. And now, Rob Sternberg.
And yes, thank you, Pete. We've got another lost episode for you here. It's since been found. It was a pretty long one, but definitely I remember it as one of the best we've done, a personal favorite. It was recorded in, I want to say July of 2019. So definitely in the middle of the coronavirus, and we didn't know if we were going to have a season and what have you. Did I say 2020? July 2020. But too good to not look for. So we looked for it, found it. It's a little looser than some of the previous installments of the minor side. Either way, the recording started with I guess it was the end of a joke, perhaps. I don't know. The joke itself has since been lost to time or to the coronavirus, perhaps. But either way, here we go. Very nice. A lot of class from the man himself. But in all seriousness, welcome to the minor side of life, where we talk candidly. Of course, no bullshit here, on the business and promotional aspects of minor league sports. Each episode will talk to an extra special guest who's either worked or is working in a minor league office or played or performs on the minor league stage. We'll talk about how they got into it, what they learned, and some opinions and personal stories along the way. If you have worked in minor league sports or want to know what it's like, then this is the show for you. For me, from the Texas League and the Eastern League, the PCL and the IL, and eventually the Southern League, my friends, and I can't wait to tell you about that. On this show here, as always, I'll bring over a decade of minor league baseball stories and experience to the table, and very much looking forward to sharing them with you. We are on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, I think Instagram as well, at The Minor Side. And we appreciate the follow, of course, and we know you haven't listened to this here episode just yet, but if you think we did a good job, kindly leave us a review, if you would, wherever you are listening. A lot of stuff to get to. We'll tell you about what's coming up here on the minor side at the end of the episode, but first, we'll tell you about this one. We're going to talk to my old friend, Brett Pollock. Brett spent about 2 decades as a minor league baseball broadcaster, and his stops included Lakewood, New Jersey, El Paso, Texas, the Huntsville Stars, and the Omaha Storm Chasers, just to name a few. I met Brett when we worked together in Omaha for the 2015 and 16 seasons. There he wore about 100 hats. He was the number 2 broadcaster. He had a hand in media relations, corporate sales. He was the in-studio producer for the team's road games, and perhaps most famously, the team's travel coordinator, which as I believe we've talked about here before, is just a nightmare of a job in the Pacific Coast League. Not easy in other leagues, but an absolute nightmare in the PCL when you're talking about a team of 30 or so guys, flying out of mid-sized cities, meaning that there's almost always a connecting flight. And then their actual gear needs to travel, and then throw in the fact that, they're on the first flight outs in the morning. There's roster moves to deal with, and the list goes on and on. And we'll get to that with Brett. Keep in mind, in Brett's case, and I can't wait to get to this with him, is that the team in Omaha in 2013 and 2014, they backed into the playoffs both years. So that threw some uncertain playoff travel as well. And the truth is that I always like to kid Brett. And like I said, I'm very much looking forward to covering that with Brett. Brett gets excited, and so we'll cover all this ground with him. First, though, we do have some of our own catching up to do, and I'll hopefully mention this quickly in passing, and we'll get to it, I'm sure, in the future. But in mid-December, all the way back in 2019, I accepted a position with the Rocket City Trash Pandas right here in beautiful Madison, Alabama. Initially, the job piqued my interest because for all the teams I've worked with, I really had a chance here to help build from the ground up and and certainly on a production side of things, where literally here I've gotten to build the control room, tear down part of it, I guess, in truth, and really have it the right way from day one, and build the crew, and off to the races we'll go. I don't want to take too much time, like I said, to cover this, but for all you diehards here on the minor side, just waiting for some new episodes, I guess I do feel like I owe you guys a bit. And so really from the initial phone call, I went down and met Garrett Fairman, another Lehigh Valley alum. He spent some time in Fresno and some other teams on the East Coast as well. He's GM here. Missed him up there by probably, like, I think 3 or 4 years. We got to talk, and he was and has been great to work with. And Ralph Nelson, who is the esteemed president and CEO of the Trash Pandas, and his wife Lisa, and just got to experience the family atmosphere they had created. And of course, Lindsay Knupp, who of course I spoke to before coming down. I didn't just show up, but we worked together for 3 years in Lehigh Valley, and we could list her credentials on and on, of course, and maybe we will one day. But I do want to get to Bretland, and we'll save it for another day. In short, I had the chance to come down here. Took a lot of thought, conversations with my C, of course, and Christina didn't just come home to Pennsylvania. She was basically home as far as her family goes. But in the end, I'd have to say it was a no-brainer. The flip side, again, hopefully, quickly, and we will get to this eventually, but the flip side was really just saying goodbye to the Lehigh Valley, especially after 3 award-winning seasons there, and them giving me the chance to really step up and sort of just call it an overarching marketing capacity there at the end. And this is basically how I wound up there in the first place. It was the chance to come back to the East Coast and get to be closer to my family as well. And this is basically how I wound up there in the first place. The chance to come back to the East Coast and get to be closer to family for a few years. As it turned out, sometimes it's just the nature of this business, of course, and that you don't know where it will take you. And really, like I said, Lindsay was the person that brought me to the Iron Pigs in the first place. We obviously had success there. And so in terms of my day-to-day, if anything, it was getting back to normal after an interesting last few months there in Lehigh Valley after she departed. And I guess we're just taking the show on the road, really. We will get to it one day. Some more about it, although I must say it's not entirely accurate. Tom Hausnick did a nice story about the move down here in the Morning Call, the Allentown paper. But I definitely do want to get to Brett, because if nothing else, this should be an entertaining look at what all else it takes to really gut it out here on the minor side in minor league baseball. And in Brett's case, what it takes to gut it out at becoming a big league broadcaster, because I know deep down and even at the very surface, that's what Brett had set out to do, become a big league broadcaster. But of course, sometimes, and there is no other way to put it, sometimes minor league baseball, the other aspects of the job just get in the way for some of these guys that want to do, one thing. And I'm sure we'll hear about that from Brett. Also, some housekeeping. Want to let you know about some more content coming your way here on the minor side. Of course, you can get caught up in the archives for the discussions we had in 2019. Our last episode was with Mitch Canham. Mitch spent about a decade in the minor leagues himself, and he's the new head baseball coach for his alma mater, the Oregon State Beavers. Next time, we'll chat with both Bill Hipsher and Dan Napoli, the makers of the 50 Summers documentary that is out now on Amazon Prime. Finally got a chance to see it there, and look forward to talking to Bill, who grew up in Omaha, started his own marketing company. Got to work with him ever so briefly in Omaha. We'll talk about everything the film covered and more coming up shortly here on the minor side. And first, I do want to tell you that this episode is presented by Promotional Adventures. I know Dustin and his team at Promotional Adventures are helping guide a lot of teams on the promotional end of things through this pandemic. And quite frankly, they've got some real potentially fruitful opportunities for you marketing folks out there. Not too often we could use the term fruitful, but you goddamn better believe we're doing it now. They've got you covered with all kinds of signage opportunities as you help ensure your guests are practicing social distancing on the concourse, at the gates, and even in the seats. I'll tell you more about that in a bit. As far as a formal introduction, Brett Pollock spent almost 2 decades, I believe I have that right, in minor league baseball. And Brett, seriously, feel free to chime in because, believe it or not, there is not a published record anywhere of this. So I'm kind of taking a shot as best as I can recollect. But Brett, I'm gonna take a shot at these teams, and you can just tell me quickly yes or no, and then we can worry about the order and such after.
Sure.
Lakewood.
Correct.
Huntsville.
Correct.
El Paso.
You got it.
And Omaha.
And also Sioux City and Independent Ball.
Sioux City Independent Ball. Okay, so we'll kind of worry about the timeline in just a sec. I first met Brett in Omaha in 2014, and Brett, at that time, you were not only in corporate and some group sales, not only the number 2 broadcaster behind Mark Nasser, not only doing PR, but worst of all, doing team travel in the Pacific Coast League. And we'll get into all that and kind of just as we were talking before we started rolling here, but it's certainly been a while. I told you kind of what I'm up to. What are you up to? How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, Rob. I'm actually back at home in Philadelphia right now, just hanging out with my parents a little bit. I had been living in New York City, still am, since January of 2017, so about 3.5 years now. And with everything that was happening in the city during the pandemic, I just thought it was best for me to get out of there for a little while, kind of reset, recalibrate, and get to somewhere where it wasn't as bad, where it wasn't as depressing, to be quite honest with you. As much as I love being in New York, it was really kind of an eerie, scary place to be during most of March and April, and I thought a break would do me well. So I have not worked in baseball since I left Omaha in 2015. When I moved to New York at first, I was working technically for the Brooklyn Nets, was working selling the luxury suites at the Barclays Center, not only for basketball, but for hockey and really any event that was going on there. Wound up being there for about a year. Got caught up in some layoffs after the team and the property was sold. And since then, I've kind of bounced around a little bit and had a couple of sales jobs outside of sports.
Okay, so let's rewind a bit. And to borrow a phrase right off the bat here, I know we're friends. Borrow a phrase right off the bat here. I know you went to the Syracuse Slapdick School of Journalism. And that was a term not by me, coined by Tony Schiavone, the former Gwinnett Braves Stripers broadcaster and legendary voice of WCW wrestling. But he says that in jest because so many broadcasters in sports come from Syracuse. But so talk about that a bit. I know you grew up listening to Harry Callis and loved the Phillies, and so that was sort of your dream job. But tell me about Syracuse, because I'm curious about getting into broadcasting in a big broadcasting school that's also a legitimate D1 sports, and that's sort of a catch-22. To me, the games are broadcast on actual networks. So in terms of like a student-run broadcast, you're not the voice of the team, and the players and the coaches have actual commitments. So where do you pick up the experience?
Yeah, it's interesting, Rob. It's kind of funny and ironic. And as much as I said that going to Syracuse was the best decision I ever made, one of my regrets and one of the worst decisions I ever made was being there and not taking full advantage of all the opportunity. I pledged a fraternity my spring semester freshman year and really kind of devoted much of my time and effort and blood, sweat, and tear and activity to that, and kind of got into the party a little bit late as far as broadcasting was concerned. I did do some sports updates on one of the local stations. I did not, however, take full advantage of it, like my peer, Mike Tirico, who I was in a freshman class with. And by the time we were seniors at Syracuse, he was on the local CBS affiliate as the weekend guy, then quickly became the mainstay there, and then went on to launch his outstanding career. So I would say that my biggest regret was not doing enough there and not taking full advantage of all the opportunity that was presented to me. I kind of joke and say that, I thought I was going to turn the microphone on and be Bob Costas because I loved sports and I thought I knew a lot about sports, and I didn't really realize what went into it and what went into making yourself a polished, good broadcaster. And unfortunately, learned as I went along in my first job, really, some things that I probably should have learned when I was in school.
And was it difficult? And you could start revealing years here because we're all friends here anyway.
Yeah.
But was it more difficult? Because I grew up too, also wanting to be a broadcaster, and I sort of, has been recanted on earlier episodes here that, at a certain point, I figured there's just too much. This is just not going to work out. Like if I'm going to be able to work in sports, it's going to wind up having to be in other areas. And thank God it all worked out. And I did get to do it, and I'm doing 100 other things. But was there less competition? I feel like it was easier to get into the door, 30 years ago, let's say.
Yes and no. It took me a while. It took me a little bit longer than I had planned on, anticipated, wanted it to. I actually went to the winter meetings 3 times and was unsuccessful in getting a job before I finally got my first job at my 4th winter meetings in Wilmington, Delaware. Actually, I was only there for about a month before I left to go to Sioux City. So it was a little bit difficult for me, but at the same time, I kind of used all the rejection as fuel, as motivation, as a way to prove people wrong that, yes, I am good enough to do this. Yes, you made a mistake in not hiring me, and that, yes, I'm going to break through and I'm going to get a job in minor league baseball and do this for a living. So I guess underneath some of my shyness, some of my reticence at times when I was a little bit younger, there was this kind of burning desire, this fierceness within me to prove people wrong and show them that I'm going to be able to do it, and I'm going to pursue my dream, and I'm going to get there.
And so walk me through. So it didn't sound like you're the most studious person at the Syracuse Slapdick School of Journalism. So what?
I did 2.75. It was okay, solid, right. Like B- average.
No, better than me. At the Emerson Slapdick School of Journalism. But what was what was your internship, and kind of walk us through that. How did you land that first job, and how'd you make ends meet in the meantime?
It was pretty tough, actually. I was fortunate. I did do an internship in Philadelphia here at the local TV station, at the local ABC affiliate, which for 40, 50 years has been far and away the leading station in the city. But as far as actually getting that job in Wilmington, I wasn't going to be on the air. I was going to do more media relations and community relations. And at least I thought it was a foot in the door. I was close to home. And I thought to myself, okay, I'll do this for a year, and then I'll kind of see what happens. And maybe I'll have an opportunity either there or somewhere else to land that broadcasting job. And what had happened was I had been at the winter meetings and had interviewed with the team in Sioux City. And they called me shortly after I started the job in Wilmington and offered me an opportunity to go there and be a producer for a talk show that they were doing leading up to the season and then during the course of the season, but not actually be on the air during games. So I thought that was a better opportunity for me and would give me a better opportunity to get onto the air quicker. So I packed up in Wilmington after about a month, drove to Sioux City. I was making, I don't even remember, maybe like $10,000 or $12,000 a year. I was 29 years old. I was the oldest guy in the office, and I was the lowest guy on the totem pole. And one of the advantages, I guess, in them reaching out to me when they did was, at that point, as I'm sure you well know, and many of your listeners do, the independent season started a little bit later than the affiliated season. So it gave them a little bit more of an opportunity to kind of sift through the resumes and talk to people. And it gave me an opportunity to get out there, get situated, and then have the opportunity to produce this talk show before the season started, and then become a part of the show during the course of the year. As a matter of fact, one of my highlights from that first year there was we got Howard David, who was doing the Bucks games at the time, courtside from Milwaukee. I think it was in Milwaukee. I might be wrong, but it was the night that the Bulls won their 72nd game, and we had him on our show about an hour and a half before that game actually started. So I was pretty proud of that. So that ultimately led me to getting the radio job with them the next year. And then I moved into a role where I was the radio announcer, the merchandise director, and selling tickets. And I was making $12,000 a year at 30 years old.
And what were you doing as the merchandise director?
I was ordering some of the merchandise, and then I had an intern that actually ran the shop for me during the course of the game since I was on the air. And then I would convene with him and go through the night's transactions and make sure that everything was good and that we were making the right amount of money, and that no money was missing, and that our inventory was kept up to stock. And
right. So after you wrapped up the game, you had to go count the receipts at the store.
Yes.
I'm sure you loved doing that.
I actually didn't mind it all that much, to be honest with you, because I had some input in some design and some merchandise that we bought, which I kind of liked. So I actually didn't mind that experience.
Really, I'm surprised you say that, actually, wanting to be a broadcaster and then getting in to that aspect of the operation. The designing, of course, for me was fun and easy, really, but the ordering was not, like getting the colors right, Pantones and such. And this, of course, is more to do with giveaway items on my end than the licensed gear for the store, although I'm not sure how that all works on the indie ball level. Never liked doing it, unless, of course, I was working with my friends Dustin and Cindy at Promotional Adventures. Then at least I knew I was in good hands and the product was going to be delivered on time and look exactly how we proofed it. Tough times in sports right now for sure, but don't forget about some great items that Promotional Adventures has ready to roll right now, including seat markers. Maybe you're in a stadium that is starting to open back up and you're having events kind of like we are down here, and you need to get your social distancing marks in the seating bowl. Promotional Adventures has got some options for you. Those, of course, make great spots for advertisers, promotional partners as well. They've got some pretty cool masks that can be dyed and sublimated, and of course, for a while now, they've had these multi-use headscarves that are called gaiters. That's one thing this has taught us, if anything, is that those multi-use headscarves, they're actually called gaiters. Those are the ones I roll with, at least for now. They've got your hand sanitizers as well. All of your combat coronavirus with a promotional twist. It's all available now at Promotional Adventures. And of course, that's all in addition to, let's say, the traditional items like bobbleheads, youth jerseys, replica stadiums, batting helmets, you name it. It's all over at promotionaladventures.com. And Brett, I want to get to PCL travel. What's interesting, and that's the second time you laughed when I said PCL travel, and I'm sure there was a time when instead of laughing, you may have been crying.
I'm
but
surprised
I guess
it didn't give me any gray hair.
My question is that, especially early on, like in terms of what you're expecting, you're wanting to be a baseball broadcaster. You're wanting to talk about baseball, live it, breathe it, that whole deal. And you're ordering merchandise and, doing sales and stuff like that. What sort of, because I'm sure the job fair wasn't in that day, and tell us the actual year, but I'm guessing that the job fair then isn't the same as the job fair now, where you walk into the seminar on the first day and they tell you, you're going to wear a lot of hats, and just not the full on production that it is in 20, or I guess 2019, 2020. What was it like then, and how were you prepared, and what were your initial impressions of what you were getting yourself into?
Yeah, I guess to a degree, I wasn't fully aware of how much emphasis there was on sales and how much you needed to do in that department in the minor leagues. Because like you said, I was really focused on becoming a broadcaster. I definitely think there wasn't as much volume and there wasn't as much pressure. It was more relaxed. And one of the things I noticed after I started to work in the business for a while and had the pleasure and was fortunate enough to go there in a capacity where I was actually looking to hire people was uh, the guys who were already working in minor league baseball were much more approachable at that time, and they didn't turn their badges around, and you could actually walk up to them and introduce yourself to them and say, hey, I'm Brett Pollock. I'm looking for a job. If you don't have anything, do you know anybody that might be hiring for a broadcaster? It was not quite as intense and not quite as pressure packed, and it was a little bit more relaxed, and it was a little bit easier to approach people back in the early and mid 90s compared to the 2010s.
And also being on the side of helping hire with broadcasters and such years later, I kind of didn't feel so bad knowing that I would hear stories of like, oh, we're not going to post this position because we posted the position last time and we had resumes and tapes 20 let's say 2 feet tall, and then we just threw them all away and called up somebody that we knew and said, hey, do you know somebody that could do this? So all those resumes and such is just, I don't want to say it's for nothing, because there is a small chance, but it is just that.
Yeah, I would agree with you. The last, probably 3 to 6 or 7 years that I was at the winter meetings as someone who was working in the business and was keeping an eye on up and coming broadcasters and what was available, rarely did you ever see a job above A ball posted.
Right, and a lot of times it's just for that exact reason, and it's happened it's happened in Lehigh Valley, it's happened in Omaha, it's happened in other places. I'm just saying, rather than have to sift through, it's kind of a lot of times it's without a full blown human resources department. Like anything, the last thing somebody wants to do is sift through 300 resumes.
Exactly.
So it's easier to just call somebody up and say, hey, who do you know?
Mm-hmm.
But either way, you did crack through that. And that's like, so you're in Lakewood for literally a cup of coffee, and then you went to Sioux City. Is that how that worked?
No. So my first job was Wilmington. I was there for like a month. Did 2 seasons in Sioux City, 1996 and 97. Wound up through that ownership group getting the job in El Paso and moving down there in 1998. I did 6 seasons there and left in February of 2004, got the job in Lakewood. That was a little bit longer than a cup of coffee, maybe 2 cups. Did 1 season there and then wound up in Huntsville in 2005. Did 5 seasons in Huntsville, actually was out of the game in 2010, and then resurfaced in Omaha 2011 and did 5 seasons there.
So El Paso, handful of years, Huntsville, handful of years, obviously Omaha, handful of years, and Lakewood in there too. So El Paso, and we'll get to that.
Yeah.
So obviously affiliated, they're in a different building, not the Chihuahuas as we know them today. Was it the Diablos then?
Yes. As a matter of fact, my first year there was 1998, and we had these horrific uniforms that some people might have seen on the internet, where it's spelled out Diablos, and they were pinstriped and they were just terrible. So what happened was, at the end of that season, we officially became the Diamondbacks' first Double-A team because they had just completed their first season, and we changed our logo and colors to match the Diamondbacks. And I also had a hand in redesigning.
You also
logo.
Changed your colors.
I'm sorry?
No, go ahead.
And I was involved actually in reshaping and reconfiguring our logo as well. So in El Paso, my first year, In 1998, we were the AA affiliate from Milwaukee. And then for my last 5 years, we were the Diamondbacks AA affiliate.
And so going, you grew up in Philly, going to Sioux City. Now you're in Sioux City, Iowa. Now you're in El Paso, Texas.
Culture shock.
We're not in Kansas anymore. And how did had you come to terms with, a lot of that?
It was a little difficult. Sioux City was tough. I have to be honest with you. It was very small. I could tell you a story essentially where I went into a bar my first weekend there, and it was my round. I had a $20 bill. I gave the bartender $10. She gave me a $10 bill back. And I looked at her and I said, okay, that's interesting. So I pulled a couple ones out of my pocket and tipped her. My round came up again, went back the second time, same thing happened. I called her over, as you know, in my inimitable style, Rob, and I said, let me ask you a question.
I don't even know what inimitable means.
I said, if I give you a $20 bill and I pay for a couple beers and you give me a $10 bill back, how do you expect me to tip you with a $10 bill? I'm not going to tip you a full 10, but I would tip you a couple dollars. She's like, I'm not here to make tips. I said, wait a minute, you're a bartender. And she happened to be very attractive. And I'm like, you're telling me that you're not back there to make tips? What the hell are you doing back there? So I quickly realized, yes, I wasn't in Kansas anymore. It was tough. It was a small town. The winters were awful, 3 times worse than Omaha, even though it was actually not that far away. And it was just very difficult being in a place where there really was no commonality for you in terms of lifestyle, in terms of most of the people that you were working with, in terms of most of the people that you met. But you learned to make the best of it. I was younger. I was eager. I wanted to learn. I wanted to be in baseball. It was my first opportunity. So I tried to soak up everything that I possibly could. And then going to El Paso was another transition where you're right on the border of Mexico. Probably 70 to 75% of the population is Mexican and or Mexican American. So it was a little bit of an adjustment, getting used to that as well. And I was actually in a good situation where I had some opportunity to grow in terms of broadcasting, because I was hosting a sports talk show for 1 hour prior to every game, home and away, every single day of the baseball season. And it was a good opportunity for me to kind of help ingratiate myself into the community with the people that were paying attention to sports, that were listening to radio. And then getting out and doing sales was also another good way for me to learn my way around, to learn some of the ways of the city, and to meet some people and to try to kind of help that transition process expedite itself, which it did. And I had a great run there. I did 6 seasons there. I look back very fondly on my time there. We had a lot of fun. We had a great group of people that I worked with in the front office. We had some great players come through there in early Diamondbacks lore. So all in all, it was a really good experience.
Yeah, we were just down there for the promo seminar this past year. So it was definitely my first time down there. Got a chance to meet Jim Paul there as well. Was he involved at that point?
No, he was not involved. The company that I was working for at the time had already purchased the team and kind of phased him out. And he was around a little bit, and there was some kind of legacy stuff that was left over for a couple of years with him. But I never actually worked with him or for him, and had honestly very, very minimal contact with him in my time there.
And what I find is interesting always with the broadcasters, where I like to, kind of pick the broadcaster's brain over the course of the season, really just in terms of what other, you kind of get to travel around and, you see what other teams' ballparks are like, what they're doing for promotions, what their giveaway items are, just kind of, pick their brain about more ballpark entertainment stuff. But you really get a tour of, in that case, was it still the Texas League then, or Southern League? I'm not sure.
Yes, but, Texas League. Yep.
So, what was the scene like at that time? Because it's really on the cusp of, I feel like around that 2000s, mid 2000s were really
Yes.
starting to break out in terms of minor league baseball as a business.
Yeah, it was really interesting, and you're right. I think you nailed it, and I think that was really kind of part of the job, and something that my partner Matt Hicks and I really took very seriously, and wanted to be able to come back to El Paso and talk to the rest of the staff about some of the things that we had seen that we really liked and some of the things that we didn't like. And Matt has since gone on to become the number 2 announcer of the Texas Rangers, and I'm very happy for him, very proud of him for being able to do that, and very proud of our association and the 6 years that we had. But you're right, yeah. And at that point, I'd say San Antonio, probably my first 2 years was kind of the quote unquote jewel of the league, Nelson Wolff Stadium, where home runs went to die in the humidity there, and where you had a lot of long extra inning games because it was so hard to score there because it was so difficult to hit the ball out of the ballpark. But then what happened was Round Rock came into the league in 2000, and that really kind of changed everything with the Dell Diamond, with the Ryans' presence, and with everybody really then having to try to keep up with them and to try to match them. And there had been some shuffling in the league. We went to some fairly older ballparks, one being in Little Rock, Arkansas. And we literally used to be taken back and forth from the ballpark to the hotel in a yellow school bus. And we were in Shreveport, Louisiana, and they ultimately relocated as well. So it was interesting because I guess at that point there was a little bit of a dichotomy with San Antonio, with Round Rock. And you had some of these older stadiums like Little Rock, and Shreveport didn't really draw all that well. Wichita was a great place to go. I really liked going to Wichita. And I'm trying to think of where else we played. God, Rob, I'm getting old. I'm trying to remember all these different places. Tulsa actually was great. It was an older ballpark, but it was a great place to play. And they gave away free tickets on Tuesday nights at one of the local convenience stores. And it was the only double-decker stadium in the league. And people used to sit in the top deck and stomp their feet all the time. And it made for a great atmosphere. And that was something that, we talked about when we went back to El Paso, that they used to give a lot of tickets away, and we didn't want to bastardize our tickets by giving them away. And that we really placed a strong emphasis on trying to sell tickets and promote value in the ticket. So, yeah, I think it was really educational for me, not only on the air being with Matt, who had already been in minor league baseball for a number of years and was very willing and able to help me and to offer advice and to guide me, but also just to see what else was out there and what other teams were doing. Again, some things that we liked and thought worked really well, and some things that we didn't like.
And we'll kind of get to your tour of the Texas League, but I guess I would just mention that, do you realize that I first got into the Texas League about 10 years later and by that time, I think every team had sort of turned over their new stadium. The whole league was sort of reshuffled, like you said. And there wasn't, by the time I was there was not a building that had been built prior to the year 2000 in that league. Mm-hmm. The oldest building was in Midland, Texas, and that, I believe, opened in, I want to say 99 or 2000.
Yeah, it opened when I was there, probably maybe a couple years after that. The old stadium, Christensen Stadium, was a nightmare if you were a pitcher and the wind was blowing out. It was almost impossible to keep the ball in the ballpark. We had some wild games in Midland when I was there my first couple of years, but they did a great job. The new ballpark, I really, really thought they did a very good job with.
Yeah, and it was right next to that soccer stadium. But and I know so you're in sort of broadcaster mode in terms of talking about the wind and how difficult it was to score in these ballparks and stuff like that. So yeah. It kind of brings me back to just the idea of how difficult is it for you? Because for me at a certain point, not to say I don't want to win or I want to win, but it's just the game loses its importance, honestly, because at a certain point, we are. And, it's drilled into you so much that we're a, marketing entertainment company. And, you kind of have to fight two battles in that, Brett. You know what I mean? Like, how was that for you over the course of your time in baseball where, you probably go home, on road trips, you're full on in baseball, hanging with the coaches, drinking beers on the road, and then you come home and it's like, okay, now we're back to being an entertainment company.
Yeah, it's definitely a balance. No question about that. I think part of the side of you that's a broadcaster, that's a baseball fan, that is associated with the team on a daily basis, wants them to succeed. And then there's that balance of trying not to be too much of a homer on the air and trying to be objective and trying to maintain and uphold your credibility as a broadcaster, where you just don't turn into a complete shill and somebody that's completely rooting for the team. But yes, I think in terms of, I guess, more from the business side, once you're in the business for a while, you understand that it's not about winning and losing, because you understand that people aren't coming to the stadium in El Paso to see Derek Jeter. Number one, especially when I started, they didn't know a lot about the prospects and who these guys were. The draft wasn't on television. The internet wasn't as prevalent. You didn't have Twitter. So you didn't have a lot of resources to find a lot of information about the players that you were watching. So there couldn't be that attachment, because you didn't watch them like college football or college basketball players and then see them make the transition to the NFL or the NBA. And especially once you get to the AA level, there's always the chance that they could be gone. And when you get to AAA, same thing. So you can't sell that attachment. Hey, come and see Derek Jeter, or come and see Ozzie Smith, or come and see Barry Bonds when they come to town, because they're only coming to town once this year. If you tried to sell, hey, come and see the Memphis Redbirds and come and see Stephen Piscotty or Randall Grichuk, they might not be there. So you can't sell it that way. So you have to sell it as baseball is almost incidental. And it's a night out with the family. It's a night out with your friends. It's a night out with your coworkers. It's an opportunity to be in a picnic area and, celebrate somebody's birthday or wedding or whatever the case may be. So I learned very quickly that that's how you kind of have to look at it and assess it, and almost kind of compartmentalize in a way as far as the broadcaster is concerned, because in some respects, winning and losing at the minor league level doesn't mean as much as it does in the big league level. Yet at the same time, I went about 8 years into my career having only gotten to the playoffs once. And then the last 9 years of my career, I was in the playoffs 6 or 7 times. So it is kind of a balance. But at the same time, it's a lot more fun to broadcast a game in August when the team's winning and has a chance to go to the playoffs than it is when the team stinks, like it was my first year in Huntsville and we won only like 58 games.
So how did you
and guys were lighting firecrackers off in the outfield in Chattanooga during the last game of the year because they so badly wanted to go home and wanted the season to end.
Who's the manager for that team?
Yeah, the manager of that team was Don Money. That was his first year as well, my first year. And I actually wound up having a great relationship with Don. He taught me an awful lot, was very, very willing and able to talk to me about the game, talk to me about his career, and really let me inside and let me have a lot of access to a lot of different things that maybe some other broadcasters might not have had the opportunity to throughout their career.
So I guess from a broadcaster perspective, that brings up another good point is where, there's such a separation really in terms of experience and I think understanding in general of you're as a rookie broadcaster in Sioux City and kind of working your way up through El Paso to Huntsville. Yeah. How do you figure out that relationship, that dichotomy of not, guessing what the manager's trying to do, not second guessing what the manager's trying to do, balancing the idea of developing the players versus winning the games? How does that all happen for you? How did you figure out how to have that relationship? And what made it work for you? Because I know you did have people fuck with everyone, especially, I know there was a story with the Argyle sweater with Jersh in Omaha, but how did that become second nature for you?
That's a great question. I think it does take a little bit of time. It does take a little bit of learning, and you have to kind of initially for me, kind of, being thrust into this world in El Paso, get over the fear of walking into that clubhouse and being able to talk to the manager. And you also have to have a manager that's somewhat receptive. And quite honestly, that's a big part of it. You can try all you want and you can make every effort possible, but if the manager isn't receptive and the manager isn't willing to share and maybe doesn't trust you, then no matter how much effort you make, it's going to be difficult. My first couple of years in El Paso were not easy. But then in 2000, I had a manager, Bobby Dickerson, who has gone on to become a coach in the big leagues. He was here with the Phillies the last couple of years. He was in Baltimore with the Orioles and was instrumental in helping Manny Machado develop. And really, probably the manager that taught me the most about the game and allowed me a tremendous amount of access into his thinking. And one of the things that was great with Bobby is when we were on the road, we would go out and have a beer after the game and we would talk baseball and I would ask him questions. And it got to the point where I had no reservation, no hesitancy, no fear about asking him, hey, why did you do this? Why did this happen? What was your thinking here? And he really tuned me in, and he was fantastic for me in that regard. 2 years later, Chip Hale, who's the bench coach for the Nationals right now, was my manager. Same kind of situation. Chip was fantastic. We developed a great friendship, and he really trusted me, and he allowed me in. And then the next year, Scott Coolbaugh was my manager. And Scott and I became very close very quickly. He actually had played in El Paso, retired as a player in El Paso, and then came back to coach and then became the manager. And it was actually funny, when I talked about Matt Hicks earlier, I was in the clubhouse one day. We were in Wichita, as a matter of fact, and he was going over the signs with one of the players. I said, do you want me to leave? And he said, no, don't worry about it. It's fine. I'd actually prefer you to know the signs so you know what's going on. And I knew the signs and Matt didn't. And I would subtly start to say things and predict things because I was able to read the signs. And then finally, after about 2 weeks, he called on, he's like, wait a minute, you know the signs. And it was a pretty funny moment for us in the booth. But, having that kind of access and that kind of trust. And again, going out for a beer after the game with him and talking, hey, why did you do this? Why did you do that? What was the move there? What was the thinking? It's a little different in Double-A because you're still in the development process and guys are still trying to learn a little bit and figure it all out. When you get to Triple-A, it's a little bit different because you want to have them polished. And in a lot of cases, especially with pitchers, put them in situations that they potentially could be in the big leagues. So going from that in El Paso to then Huntsville, where I was the number one guy, was tremendous for me because Don and I became very close, and he taught me a lot and I learned a lot from him. Again, had many nights sitting with him talking baseball and talking strategy and why did you do this? Why did you do that? And sometimes there's situations where the big league team wants to see a certain guy in a certain situation, and it might not jibe exactly with the game situation or what you would do if you were managing in the big leagues. But because this mandate comes from the major leagues, certain guys get put into certain positions to see how they perform, to see how they react. And then going from being the number one guy with unfettered access and, literally making the lineup probably 10 times a year, my last 2 years with Don, going to Omaha and not having that access and not earning that trust my first couple of years with Jersh was hard for me. It was really hard for me. And it was kind of unsettling because I felt it somewhat prevented me from fully doing my job. But Doug Henry was the pitching coach my first year. Doug was amazingly welcoming to me, and I'd go out to dinner with him a couple of times, and he would always answer my questions, talk to me about guys, what they were doing, what they were working on. Same thing with Tommy Gregg. He was the hitting coach the whole time I was there, and Tommy was fantastic. And one thing I learned right away about being a broadcaster in the game is being on the field during batting practice. That was pounded into my head my first year in Sioux City, and it stuck with me. And I can't tell you how many conversations I had with Tommy Gregg during my 5 years in Omaha where he told me so much and told me what he was working on with guys, what guys were struggling with, what they needed to do to get better. Watching him just behind the cage, maybe reposition a guy's hands while they were talking was something that was huge that you could talk about on a broadcast. And I would have no reservation whatsoever walking up to him and saying, "Hey, Tommy, I saw you working with, this guy behind the cage. I saw you move his hands. What are you trying to do?" And he would tell me. So as much as the effort is that you put into it and make, there's got to be reciprocation on the other end. And when it doesn't happen, it's tough.
And there's a lot to unpack there. I want to lead with, what's in my head right now is how great was Tommy Gregg?
Oh, Tommy was fantastic. And we still talk, we still text. I'll text him next weekend for Father's Day. And I learned a tremendous amount about hitting. And, it was just great to just go down there and, first of all, see how the guys responded to him and how they reacted to him so positively and so willingly, being kind of thirsty and agreeable to become better hitters and for that knowledge that he could impart. And then just to be able to talk with him and BS with him and find out what I needed to find out was tremendously helpful for me. He was great. I look forward to batting practice every day when I was in Omaha. And really, when people ask me what was my favorite part about the job, as much as I loved the game and as much as I loved calling the game, those 45 minutes during BP every day were solace. And they were also great for developing those relationships, not only with the coaches, but with the players, and them getting to know you as Brett, not necessarily the radio guy, and them being able to ultimately form that bond and form that trust where you could then talk to the players as well and get that information you were seeking and make the broadcast that much more informative.
So that, we're getting to a point in Omaha, and I do kind of want to cover certainly Huntsville, since that's where we are emanating from live here with you, or y'all. But just, we're touching on Tommy and Jersh and Doug Henry and the time in Omaha. And what a time to be in Omaha, with the crop of talent that went through there. And I caught some of them in Northwest Arkansas and some of the other guys, up in Omaha with the Storm Chasers, and you had mentioned with finally getting to the playoffs 9 times, including probably the most improbable run I'm going to guess was 2013.
Yes.
Was 2013 or 2014 then that you had your first milk bath?
2013. I still have the pictures on my phone, and you can thank Chris Dwyer for that. He was out to get me from the minute the clinching game started in Salt Lake, and they got me.
Why was he out to get you?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I always thought we got along very well. I liked Chris, thought he was a good guy. He had a great run through the postseason. But there were guys telling me, and he was chomping in the dugout, stomping in the dugout, saying, "I can't wait to get Pollock. I can't wait to get Pollock." And they got me.
So, and then I want to touch on travel too. Just for backstory here. So Omaha goes on an improbable run in 2013. I think they made the playoffs with a less than 500 record, and then just start winning games throughout the playoffs. And in the PCL, Brett, why don't you just tell us about PCL travel? Just at first, and because I'll go to some teams and they're like, "Oh, it's the travel's tough." I book the travel, or they call the bus company and. They're going to book your longest trip of the year is a 8-hour trip to wherever, and that's your travel. But in the Pacific Coast League, because you got 3 different time zones and 16 teams, it's some there's some busing, but most of the flights are coach flights where you got to be on the first flight out in the morning. So you're broadcasting these games and at the same time monitoring flights. Is that not accurate?
Yes. As a matter of fact, my first year there in 2011, we opened the season on the road and came back. And after our first homestand, we're set to fly out for our second trip on a Saturday morning. Friday night, I just get home from the ballpark, and I know I have to be at the airport early. So I've got my own personal BlackBerry, and I have a team BlackBerry. And I get a call from the travel agent at about 11:30, I get a call from our trainer 5 minutes later that there's horrible weather in St. Louis. I don't remember where we were flying, but we were flying through St. Louis the next morning, and everything was shut down, and we had to rearrange everything. And I was back and forth literally on 2 calls, talking to our trainer, to our travel agent, to the airlines to try to get us out on a flight the next morning. And we ultimately got things situated probably about 2:30 in the morning. And I think the flight was at like 6 or 6:30 through Chicago. And then I had to be at the airport to facilitate the teams getting out. So I had to get all the equipment checked in before the players even got there. And then I had to basically get the players boarded and literally kind of like babysitting, say, okay, here is your baggage claim for your personal bag. Do not lose this, because when you guys get to Memphis, if your bag isn't there, this is the only way they're going to find it. And I had to do that for 5 years for every road trip. It was difficult, like you said, because you wanted to, we had to be mindful of expenses. And as much as we'd like to fly maybe a little bit later, it generally was a little bit more expensive. So you also had to keep in mind that you had to get the team to whatever city they were going to. The equipment had to be picked up. Then they had to be picked up on a bus, which the host city arranged for them. But then when they got to the hotel, you didn't want them sitting at the hotel for a couple of hours before they could check in. So there were a lot of moving parts, and I got blasted a couple of times for getting the team to the hotel at about 10 o'clock in the morning.
What was the worst one?
When they couldn't check in until 1.
What was the worst one?
That was one of the worst ones for sure. I got some calls that were not very pleasant, but I think the worst one actually was my last year there, when we were playing in Albuquerque and then a day game to finish the series, and then busing to El Paso afterwards. I lined up only one bus. And I used to go to the radio station to be the producer for the broadcasts when the team was on the road. And the game was early. It was like 11 o'clock in the morning. I get a call from Brian Polberg, our manager. He was not very happy. And I genuinely got along great with Paulie, still talk to him quite often. And then I got a call from the dugout from our trainer. And then he put one of our players on the phone, a longtime backup catcher in the big leagues, and every other word out of his mouth. Yes, every other word out of his mouth pretty much began with an F. And he threatened to tell the Major League Baseball Players Association that we were only sending them on one bus on a 4-hour ride, which, having gone through many, many bus trips longer than 4 hours, I did not think was that big a deal. Their concern was not only they didn't have enough room, there were too many guys on a cramped bus, but they didn't have enough room for the equipment. So as the game was going on, I had to get authorization from the front office. Then I had to actually find another bus and get it to the ballpark and get it there in time. And ultimately, we made it happen. But that was a rough morning. Yeah, that was not pleasant. That was probably the most fired up Paulie had ever been with me. And he was not very pleased. And Eric Kratz, as you mentioned,
that was a hell of a guess.
Fired up. Yeah, he, as we like to say in baseball, he had the ass, and but I got the situation resolved. But that was probably the worst yelling and screaming that I endured in travel.
I remember, and this, I don't think it had anything to do with you per se, but correct me if I'm wrong. But there, and I think it was, I forget what, I want to say it was 2015 or 2016, but it was Alex Gordon, who in Omaha, in Lincoln, in the state of Nebraska, there's, I don't want to say there's Jesus and there's Alex Gordon, but he's maybe in the top 5. And he basically, all we had to do was say that he was going to be there, and the tickets sold themselves at that point. So I don't know if this was his first run, and he had never been a storm chaser, because he was in I think he went straight from AA in Wichita to Kansas City. So
right, and then he came back in 2010 to learn how to play the outfield, but the team was still in the old stadium.
Okay, so this was his first time as a storm chaser then. Oh, you're right.
Yes.
Okay. So still name on the marquee. So you had even less tickets to sell. And so, because the old building was, 25,000 seats, and this was like 943 or 946, something like that, less than 10. And he's in the building. Everything's fine with us. And I forget who our opponent was, but their gear wasn't in the building, or their catcher's gear wasn't in the building.
Yeah, so what happened was we had been out on the West Coast. I think we were coming back from Vegas. It was a Sunday game. It was a 5:00 game. We didn't land till about 12:30. We were playing Sacramento. They were also coming in from California. They landed at almost the identical time. And Mark Nasser and I, who you had mentioned before, had gone to our boss and in the offseason said, you've got to move this game back because of travel. We're both coming from the West Coast. If there's any problems or any issues, it's going to impact the start time of the game. We asked to have the game moved back an hour. It was refused. So I get to the airport it's about 12:30 Sunday afternoon.
Sorry, was that within 24 hours? You needed the game moved back, or what?
No, we just wanted the game moved back. No, we asked him in January and February during the offseason to move the game back. And our boss had said no. So I knew there was going to be an issue that day. I just knew it. I get to the airport 12:30. I have someone from the front office come with me. I'm grabbing Sacramento's gear. The other person is grabbing our gear because she can easily identify it. And we're getting all the bags off the carousel. And
keep in mind, Brett has to be friends with all the gate agents and all the baggage people at the Omaha airport. It's a part of your job.
Yes. So I would employ the sky caps to take the bags from the carousel out to the curbside. And then I had another person that I hired who had a big truck, and then they would load the gear on the truck, and that person would drive the gear from the airport to the ballpark, which was 25 to 30 minutes. It was a long ride. So we're hustling. And at that point, on a normal day, I don't have an inventory list to check. Whatever comes out on the plane, I grab, gets off the carousel, sky caps, put it on the whatchamacallit, and they take it outside. So now we're really pressed for time. So there's no way I'm counting. I have no idea how much of the gear is actually there. And we get it on the truck. We get it loaded up. I get back to the ballpark, and now we're trying to scramble to get lineups. And the clubhouse guys are putting the equipment away. They're getting everybody's lockers set up. And then I am alerted that some of the gear did not arrive in Omaha and therefore is not at the ballpark. So we call the airlines. And when you're in this situation, when you're leaving a city, you're telling the people at the gate that are checking the equipment and that this is priority, and all the equipment has priority tags on it. So this has to go before the players' personal bags. We the players' personal bags can wait, but the gear has to be there so we can play the game. So I'm alerted that a handful of bags are missing. Some catcher's equipment is not there. Some hats are not there.
This is our gear, or this is
Sacramento's gear.
Right.
Sacramento's gear is not there. So Steve Scarsoni is the manager who had played for the Phillies when I was growing up. I knew him, knew of him. And I think I'd met him once or twice before, but I'd gone in and talked with him, and we were kind of figuring everything out. Everything seemed to be fine. So I call the airlines. When's the next flight coming in from Sacramento? We got to track down this gear. And they tell us it's going to be, I don't remember, like 4:30, 5 o'clock. So now I've got to go back to the airport to get the gear. And now the game's supposed to start at 5 o'clock. So everything has to be pushed back because we can't have the pitchers warm up and then sit down and wait. So we actually got closer to the start time that we wanted. We got to sell a lot more food, a lot more beer, a lot more merchandise. I raced back to the airport to get the gear. I'm doing like 85 miles an hour on the freeway in the Storm Chasers decaled and logoed SUV. Get to the airport. There's the gear. And there's about 10 or 12 bags. We load it up, and I fly back to the ballpark, come in through the back. And I don't know how much of this part of the story I want to tell. I don't want to, because bygones are bygones, but somebody grabbed some of the equipment and said, I'll take it in myself. And that really pushed my buttons. And And I was blamed for that. And I had no blame at all for it, given the fact that the flights had emanated, as you said, from the West Coast. We had already asked the game to be pushed back. I don't control what gets put on the flight. I got every single bag that was there at the airport to the ballpark, and then I went back to get it again. You had to fill in for me and do my talk show in the ballpark.
Oh, that's right.
I literally got on the air like 2 minutes before the pregame show started. I had smoke coming out of every orifice of my body, and I was blamed for that. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm the one that just busted my ass moving 150 fucking bags of baseball equipment. I just ran back up the freeway 25 minutes away, got 10 more bags, busted ass back on the freeway, and got here. And you had all that extra time to sell more beer, more hot dogs, and more T-shirts. But it's my fault? No, that did not play well.
In the immortal words of Brett Pollock, no fucking chance.
No fucking chance was that my fault. Not a shred of it was my fault. I did everything I possibly could and more, and that situation
I didn't
blamed on me.
It wasn't my intention to certainly, however many years later, throw salt in wounds, but it I just wanted to exemplify how much of a pressure cooker that PCL travel role is.
It's really tough.
And you did a good job of exemplifying it, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
I don't know if it was at the end of last.
Job setting it
up. I think that the next winter, the winter meetings, I went to the PCL travel meeting. And that was a war zone. That was like I wouldn't say a war zone to stretch, but that was like you could tell the people in that room, they have been through things, and they have been through things like that. And you rattled off that was just 2 stories from one season, or there was 2 stories from single season. There's the All-Star game. You did the travel for the All-Star game. Where we hosted.
I did not
in 2015.
No, here's the monkey wrench. I did not do the travel for the All-Star game. And then when everything went haywire the next morning, when they were trying to get the players out and they couldn't do it, they blamed me for it.
Fucking Brett.
And because I had already been to the airport that morning because we were starting the second half in Nashville. So I'd say about 2/3 of the team had come back to Omaha the night before, and then we flew out as a group. We got the equipment out. I went back to my apartment because I was actually off that day, and I was going to see Kenny Chesney that night. And I was on my sofa. It was like 8 o'clock in the morning, and my phone's going crazy, and I'm getting all these calls and texts that everything's going haywire with the travel. Like, nobody ever asked me. Nobody said, can I? No. And they blamed it on me. They said, I never offered to help. I'm like, well, nobody ever asked me. Nobody got me involved. Nobody said, we need your help. And the person that was running it never asked, never said a word, nothing. And I got blamed for it.
Let me ask you, with all this, with all these stories, do you think, when you heard, this past off season that they were kicking around, just doing a season, in Arizona or in Florida or in, both, did that sound so bad to you?
No, I guess given the circumstances that we're all in, probably not. Long term, do I think it's feasible? No, I think guys need to be able to travel and experience different places and understand what it takes to be able to play when you travel and how you get prepared for a 6, 8, 9 day road trip. Because if you get to the big leagues, I mean, granted, the travel is easier, but you're going to be on a 6 or a 9 day road trip, and you have to know how to take care of yourself. You have to know,
right? But you're not going to be getting up at 4 a.m. to be on tough. A flight. No, like, it's not the same. It's the PCL travel specifically seems excessive.
It's brutal. It's brutal. It's the worst travel, I think, of any league in the minor leagues, without question, even though you're flying everywhere. But no, I think it's good for player development to be able to experience, like I said, different ballparks, ballparks maybe that have better lights than others, ballparks that have better mounds than others, be on the road. You bond that way on the road, and you learn what it's like to travel, and you learn what it's like to play on the road. I think it's an essential part of a player's development.
I guess another change is that you were directly involved with was radio. I've had it kicked around to me in certain offices where it's like, what if we did? What would it look like if we didn't have radio? If we didn't have, if we didn't have a broadcast, if we didn't have a game broadcast. So that idea is happening, or at least it's starting. It didn't just come out of thin air. Are the broadcasts? Can you look at it objectively, and say the broadcasts themselves are viable?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, in a way, I would say yes right off the bat, because essentially what it is a 3 or 3.5 hour infomercial for the team. Granted, you want to sell as many commercials as you can, but you also want to have some promotions in there
but again,
as well.
Let's just say,
now, granted, you're selling that to the people that are already tuned in and listening, especially at the minor league level. But I think that baseball is different than every other sport in that it's day to day, and everything that happens in today's game has an effect on tomorrow's game and maybe the day after, and everything in tomorrow's game has an effect on the game the following day. So I think it's an essential part of it, because it can be in the background. You can be in your car listening to the game, yet still have a conversation with your wife or your brother or your kids, and the game can be on the background. You can be in the kitchen cooking at home and have the game on the back, on in the background, and be that thing that you're listening to that occupies your time, but also doesn't maybe distract you from other things that you're doing. Obviously, like I said, you're driving in the car. Now with your phone, people can listen on the phone. They can listen on their computer. When I was in Huntsville, one of the great pleasures that I took was after a game on the road, I would go back to the hotel. I would unwind a little bit, and because the game was fresh in my mind and I was doing the game notes at that time, I would get a head start on my prep for the next day and start my game notes. I would go to MLB.com. I had a subscription to MLB Radio, and if the Dodgers were playing, I would put the Dodgers on and listen to Vince Scully.
So if a broadcast costs, let's just say $5 to $10,000, $20,000 for a season, do you get that return, especially in the context of we're not, and I'm not all in on this. I'm just posing it to you. We're not, your quote baseball team. We're your entertainment destination. So what's the argument that you see that return? I know it's the advertising, but then you could, honestly, it's like, and when I was in Omaha, this was the answer, where it was like, well, how many people are listening to the games? Well, we couldn't access the ratings. But PCO, you can't do that because the games happen, they're day games and they're day games and night games at different time zones on different days. So there's never a real measure. But the best numbers I've ever seen have never been good. So it's like, is anyone listening? Who is the type of person that is listening? Is this the type of person that we A, need to keep marketing to, or B, care in the first place?
There's definitely some validity to that, but then I guess you can look at it the other way and say, does it really matter? I mean, with everything else that we're doing, this is part of a bigger picture. This is, again, kind of like what I said. It's a 3.5 hour infomercial. It's branding. It's a way to keep your name out there. It's a way to be recognized, and it's a way to engage some people.
I think to me, the way this is going, the more
the question I'm asking then is I don't think most teams look at it and say, we're doing radio so we can make $50,000. No, you're doing radio as branding, and it's almost kind of like a lost leader in a way, because there's other streams of revenue that are generating more for you. And I think this is all part of it. And it also could play into, well, you know what? You're going to buy an outfield fence sign. I'll charge you $12,000, and as part of that package, I'm going to throw in a 60-second commercial for you.
Right, I think that's at this point that's it's sustainability that you could include that in deals, and then every once in a while, if you say if you're meeting with a potential client, a potential sponsor that says, well, I only do radio, or for whatever reason, then you could say, oh, well, we obviously do radio as well. But to me, ultimately, throughout the course of the conversation, thinking about it even more, it's there's a certain prestige that comes with it as well. So,
Absolutely.
For the handful of teams that don't have radio right now, and they're like, oh, well, you could find us on whatever.com. It doesn't sound that great. It doesn't sound like they're, a big deal in town, let's say.
Yeah. And Rob, to be honest with you, I learned over the course of my career as well that if I had sponsors that I had a good relationship and they were at the ballpark and I was able to get them up to the booth and have them hang out, they thought that was the greatest thing ever. And if I could drop in a little bit of an ad-libbed plug for one of my clients, I did it. And I think prestige is a good word. I think that, you can also use it as a tool and a vehicle. In Omaha, we did the community organization of the night, and sometimes they were the sponsor of the night. And part of the perks, part of the package was that they got to come on the air and talk for half an inning. So I think there are a lot of pieces that still make it viable and useful and something that, should still be a part of the daily life of a minor league baseball team.
Sure. And we're not going to solve radio's problems because they've got their own problems as well. And there's other ways to listen and other reasons for it. I just, sort of posed that to you. Let me ask you this. So how many years were you in minor league baseball? 19. Okay. So I was good on nearly 2 decades.
You were right on.
Goddamn. Do you think that you could be, and I'm assuming that your goal was not to be a minor league broadcaster, was, as growing up a Phillies fan, wanting to be a major league broadcaster. Do you think that it's possible that you could be in the minor leagues for too long, that you get sort of tinged with, there's a tinge of, he's a minor league guy?
Yes, and when I was doing it, I used to kind of use the comparison to a 4-year college basketball player. Say, wait a minute, why didn't this guy go in the draft after his sophomore year or even his junior year? So I think to a degree you can be labeled as a minor league guy. I think somehow, some way, you've got to have a sponsor or someone that's going to open the door for you. And it was really interesting because when I was in Huntsville and we were at the Brewers, Dan O'Brien, who was a general manager in the big leagues for quite some time and was an assistant at the time to Doug Melvin, he and I became fairly close. And, I pinned him down in the dugout one day after batting practice. And I said to him, Dan, why isn't it the same for us, for broadcasters, as it is for the players? I get it. There's 25 jobs. There's only 2 or 3 for us. But why won't teams look internally at the minor leagues to the guys who live and breathe it with them every day, right? When I was in Huntsville and Ryan Braun was coming up, I got to know Ryan Braun better than any broadcaster in Milwaukee knew him at that point, and probably would for another year or 2. Right? I knew Alcides Escobar. I knew Lorenzo Cain. I traveled with them. I ate with them. I drank with them. And yet there doesn't seem to be the same sort of direct path for a minor league guy to the big leagues. And we had a very honest and engaging discussion about it. And Braun actually went on a couple of years later to call the Brewers on my behalf when they had an opening. Unfortunately, it didn't work. But I always felt that the guys in the minor leagues kind of got, I think shafted is too strong a word, but I don't think they got enough respect and enough of an opportunity to make that same climb that the players they were with. Because like I said, we're with those guys every day. I was with Lorenzo Cain for a year and a half. I was with Alcides Escobar for a year and a half. Ryan Braun's father listened to me every night for half a season, and I got feedback from Brawny, good or bad, every night for half a season. So why wouldn't it make sense for me to have a look and an opportunity to go to the big leagues with those guys who I was with in the minor leagues?
And I'm sure you had enough time thinking about it. What'd you come up with?
Usually because the baseball side wasn't really involved in the decision. It was more on the business side. And in a lot of cases, there wasn't a lot of harmony between the business side and the baseball side. So I could have had, and I did, I had a handful of guys in the Brewers baseball department vouch for me, and it didn't carry any weight because I didn't have the relationship with the guys that were making the decisions. And it's unfortunate that that's the way it worked, but that's generally how it happened and played out. And like I said, I think it was a little unfair. And I think there are plenty of guys in the minor leagues who are deserving of being in the big leagues. Obviously, it's very difficult to get to the big leagues because once you get there, why would you ever leave? But when those jobs did open, I don't know if enough, and there's been, a sprinkle of guys here and there, but I just think overall, I don't think enough minor league guys got enough consideration and enough legitimate shots at getting big league jobs.
It's a sort of natural segue into what, in was it 2015, 2016? What was the, I've come to terms with, I'm a broadcaster. I've reached AAA baseball. There's only so many AAA broadcasters, and at this point, it's not worth continuing to pursue.
Well, I don't know if I'd phrase it exactly like that. Let me see.
I thought I was doing you a favor. I thought I was.
No, you were kind of right. I will tell you that in Omaha, because of all the issues with travel and the demands that it put on me, both physically and mentally, I was fried by 2015, my last season. I was fried. And it got to the point really where I didn't even enjoy going to the booth because by the time the game started, I was so tired and so mentally drained that I didn't really take as much enjoyment out of it as I had throughout my career. And I needed a break. And the other thing was for me, at that point, I was 48. I had this disease in my body that I wanted to move to New York, and I was dead set on moving to New York, which I ultimately did, as we talked about when we first started. I never really fully gave up on the dream. I still haven't to a certain degree, but I needed a break, and the break was welcome. I'll be honest with you, Rob, when I'm in my apartment in New York and I'm watching a game on TV, I'm broadcasting that game in my head. It hasn't left me. It's the only thing I ever wanted to do, literally, since I was 5 or 6 years old. It was not easy to walk away. It was not easy, quite honestly, to see some guys get jobs in the big leagues that got them. It hasn't been easy. I miss the game. I miss batting practice. I miss being around the guys talking baseball. So it's been a little bit more difficult for me at times than I thought it was going to be. But I also did not want to plateau. Like in Omaha, and I had a great relationship with Mark. I enjoyed working with him. I thought we had a really good rapport on and off the air. But as long as he was there, I was always going to be the number 2 guy. I did not want to go to another PCL team and be the number 1 guy because I thought it was a lateral move, even though maybe it might not have been. And I don't even know if there were any opportunities. And really at that point, my thinking was I have to get out of the minor leagues. I don't want to be labeled a minor league guy for my career. I personally think I'm better than that. I think I can broadcast big league baseball. I need to change. I need to shift. And part of the reason why I wanted to go to New York was because I thought if anything was ever going to happen, if I could ever meet somebody that might have some juice, that might have the access to networking to the people that I need to talk to, I figured it would happen in New York as opposed to maybe the middle of the country. And that's not a slight on Omaha or the middle of the country. I was just ready for a change. And I thought if I could get in front of some people in New York and make my case and they could open some doors for me, then that maybe was the route that I needed to go. And that would maybe open the door that I needed to have opened. And I don't want to give away too much. I had one opportunity a couple of years ago. I kind of cracked the door open, and I need to burst through that door, and I'm still working on doing that. So it's never fully left me. But at the time, 2015, I guess you kind of talked about it and kind of summed it up. But I really needed a break. I was just flat out just fried and really needed a change.
It's funny. And I think, people that are in minor league baseball, and it hasn't happened to me yet, I say yet because it just hasn't, but, people that wind up doing other things, or I feel like everybody hits that same wall in one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be on the sales side. It could be on the broadcasting side, the broadcasting/travel/PR. I get it. It just could be just on the PR side. But I think what's so incredible about just if you were to type your job description at that time, that was wild. That was a wild role. And, you're surrounded by, I think at the time, I was probably 29, 30, something like that. 28, I don't know. And then, obviously the minor league staffs are generally skew younger, but I feel like It's because everybody hits that wall earlier, but you started later and hit that wall later.
Yeah. And, I'm glad I did. I had some radio experience before I started. That was definitely helpful. I think I got into minor league baseball at a great time. And quite honestly, I think I got out at a great time. I don't know if I was a young guy, if I'd want to get into it now. There's been a lot of changes. And I'm not sure if it would be for me, but I look back on my career very fondly. I'm very proud of it. And kind of the way we talked about me overcoming, the obstacles to get into it and going to the winter meetings and not getting a job a couple of different times and probably being able to paste a wall in my parents' apartment with all of my rejection letters at one point. But, like I said, I persevered and I gave it everything I had. I'm very proud of the relationships that I've built and still maintain in the game, both on the field and off the field. But it was time for me to embark on something else and maybe find a different path to get to where I want to go. Because like I said, there is no clearly defined path for a radio guy in the minor leagues. As a player, it's obvious. You climb up the ladder, and when you're good enough, you get to the big leagues. But there's a very normally somewhat circuitous route for a radio guy, and it's not as clearly defined. And I really thought that it was time for me maybe to try something different and do something different and see if I could kind of, for lack of a better term, kind of backdoor my way into something.
Obviously, wish you luck. This is a perfect segue to wrap this up, but I just don't, in the immortal words of Southside Johnny, that I've been repeating this weekend, as a matter of fact, I don't want to go home.
Well, I'll say this. We've gone for, about an hour and a half, and we haven't talked about Springsteen at all.
Oh, no, that was my bad. But maybe, there's always time in the future. But, thank you, though, Brett, and obviously all the best in the future and in the short term as well. Definitely appreciate the time, Bretland.
Yeah, well, I'm glad we did this, man. It was fun.
Absolutely. Brett Pollock, folks. Until then, if you liked what you heard here on the minor side, please let us know. We look forward to interacting. The show is on social media at The Minor Side on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Coming up on The Minor Side, we're going to continue the sort of Omaha flavor from today a bit, and we're going to be joined by Bill Hipsher and Dan Napoli, whose documentary 50 Summers out now on Amazon Prime Video. Did a whole festival tour and took home a bunch of awards. And really, if you like the show, or even if you don't but are into minor league baseball, you got to go out of your way to see it. They deal with the the history of the industry through the lens of the Omaha franchise that had been around since 1969, and follows much of the transformation over the course of the next 50 years, 50 summers. That's where they get the title from. Either way, Bill Hipsher, looking forward to talking to him and Dan next time here on the minor side. And then it took a few months, and it happened. We are going to talk to a venerable minor league operator, and I think if there was a Mount Rushmore of minor league operators, it'd be hard not to include Jim Paul. Jim Paul, who not only invented the Minor League Baseball Promo Seminar, or the Innovator Summit as we know it, but also I believe he was the first person to serve nachos, or as he calls them, nachos and cheese. First person, allegedly, to sell them in ballparks, and so we're so looking forward to that conversation as well. It took a long time to get that going. Make sure to subscribe to this show so you know when it is live. We will be in touch. Definitely looking forward to next time we get a chance to talk. And of course, we thank Promotional Adventures for presenting this episode of The Minor Side of Life. For me, I am at Rob Sternberg on Twitter. Thank you so much for listening. Had a lot of fun. For the details, here's the great Pete Candianis. He's a real nice guy.
This has been a presentation of The Minor Side of Life. We kindly ask for your support of this program by subscribing to the show on your preferred podcast player, joining the newsletter list at minorside.com, and following The Minor Side on social media. Plus, you can always visit theminorside.com for exclusive content and more. Thank you for listening.